So we're continuing this series called Hope for Every Soul. And this morning I want to speak to you about hope for the broken soul. And I don't know what everybody's backgrounds are, but I do know this, that at some point in your life, and every person, you experience something that breaks you, that hurts you, that brings a level of pain in your life that you don't know even how to process. And what I've learned about this is that it's different for everyone, but it's something that every person has in common. And I believe that Jesus had some things to say about this. And I want to look at a story today that's actually in the Old Testament, but it's incredibly encouraging for us. Now, a couple of weeks ago, it's probably a month or two ago, at least a month or two ago now, my parents came down to Baton Rouge or up, and they were visiting with us, and they wanted to go to a park, hang out with the kids. So we go to the park that has the rock climbing wall off Perkins back this way, and we were having fun there. The kids were playing, and we saw the rock wall, and my dad challenged me to a rock wall competition. Now, I don't know if you know my dad. My dad is in the back, and he was a football player in high school, always built. And I remember growing up as a kid, always thinking, I want to beat my dad in a race. I want to be able to tackle my dad. There was always this level of competition because I looked up to him so much. He's such a strong man. So he challenged me to climb this rock wall, and I'm thinking, surely by now I will be able to outdo my dad in rock climbing. So we strap on the harness and everything, and we get ready to climb the wall, and we start climbing, and what I'm doing the whole time as I'm climbing is I'm looking around the corner to see how he's doing, because I want to outdo him. And as long as I can beat him, I don't care about anybody else's standards, but if I can beat him, then I'm going to be okay. So I'm climbing this wall, and I notice on one side, he ends up getting up pretty high, about 3/4 of the way up, and we're getting really tired. So I finally go over to the side he just climbed, and I start climbing. And I get to a spot where I finally think I got past where he was. So I got up, and I didn't even get up to the top, and I'm like, that's good enough. I beat my dad. I'm better than him, at this. I'm stronger. I'm more masculine. So at this point, I let go, but I'm so tired, I have zero control over my body. So as I start to rappel down the side of the rock wall, I let go, and as I let go, this is what happens. My mom was actually videoing it. So I lose my strength, and I'm just like, okay, that's clearly enough for me. I let go, and on the other side of the mountain, there happens to be an elderly lady who is clearly in at least her 60s. And I run into this lady, and the video's only 15 seconds because I had to grab it off Instagram. But this lady looks at me with this face of hatred, and why would you do this to me? And how could you be so irresponsible? And just her words said it all. She didn't say a word to me. I was like, I'm so sorry. And she was just like, get away from me, didn't want to talk at all. I had to go back later and apologize, and she was nicer, But I just remember in that moment feeling so humiliated. I felt stupid because I'm trying to outdo my dad. And I think I'm doing well. And I've got this level of pride that's just growing and growing in me. And I just totally proved the word true that pride comes before a fall and a haughty spirit before destruction. And this is exactly what happened to me. And I'm building myself up, and then all of a sudden I take this embarrassing fall. But that's good for us sometimes to experience something like that, because pride is really the opposite of the heart of God and what he wants for us. And I say that to say this morning, that sometimes the level of brokenness that we experience, even though God doesn't inflict those things on us, they can still be good for us on some level. So I know that we all have experienced something in us that you can't explain. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't seem fair. Maybe you didn't get that promotion, or that relationship didn't work out and now somebody else is with them, or your kids just don't seem to be as well behaved as somebody else's, which seems to be our story sometimes. But we are always trying to evaluate and make sense of what's going on in our life. And I've learned this from experience. Sometimes it doesn't make sense, but God wants us to be in a season because it's good for us. And I believe even in the level, even in brokenness, even in something that hurts, sometimes it's good for us to be in that, because when you're broken, I believe that it brings you closer to the heart of God, because God loves to carry broken people. That when your pride is down, God can get close, and God loves to carry you. and he loves to support you, and he loves to help you through something because he doesn't want to see you try on your own, but instead, he wants his strength to be seen. I want to look at a story in the Old Testament, 2 Samuel 4, just to kind of set up the story for you. There's a king named Saul, and his son's name is Jonathan. Now, Saul was a man who was even chosen by God to be king, but this man ended up being, he wasn't going after God's heart, so God wanted to get him out and bring a new king in, who was King David, who you may have heard of. And this king Saul and his son Jonathan both die in a war. Now Jonathan's son, he had a son named Mephibosheth. Now, Mephibosheth he's in line to be king one day. He's a prince. And let me just jump into the story and show you what happened in this guy's life. It says this in verse 4, Saul's son Jonathan had a son named Mephibosheth who was crippled as a child. He was 5 years old when the report came from Jezreel that Saul and Jonathan had been killed in battle. When the child's nurse heard the news, she picked him up out of fear and fled. But as she hurried away, she dropped him and he became crippled. So this guy, Mephibosheth, he is in line to be king. He's a prince, and he gets dropped and becomes crippled. So can you imagine how unfair this must have seemed to him? Because what's crazy about this is he knows who he is. He's old enough. At 5 years old, you know your royalty. You know the family you belong to. You know your lineage. You know exactly what's ahead for you. So this guy, even at a young age, he experienced an incredible level of brokenness, literally, that just stops his future in its tracks. And he's not able to walk in that because of something that seems to be so unfair for him. So he ends up breaking his legs, probably is what happened, and there's nothing wrong with his mind. So he's thinking as he's growing up, this isn't fair, but his body is lame. He's not able to walk. And I want to look at something interesting about his name. His name, it says that his name actually was changed. That whenever he was the prince, his name wasn't Mephibosheth. His name was Mirabel, which means opponent of Baal, or an opponent of Satan, basically. So this guy had this warrior name, and all of a sudden his name is changed to Mephibosheth because they're in hiding. And you know what Mephibosheth means? It means son of shame. So even this guy's name is changed because he's in hiding the rest of his life. He's trying to hide from David. He's trying to hide from anyone who would want to make sure that his family is wiped out. So this guy's name goes from royalty and warrior to son of shame. This is this guy's story. I think that life is full of really unexpected moments like that. It's just like, gosh, why is this happening to me? But I believe that even in that, when you can't make sense of it, God is trying to do something with it. And God will make sense of it if you just wait, if you're patient and stop trying to take it into your own hands. In February, we were driving back from a birthday party in New Orleans. And if you know the long stretch between New Orleans and Baton Rouge called 310, we were passing over the spillway area. And my truck at the time breaks down. So I had a smaller mid-sized truck, and it breaks down on the interstate right there while vehicles are just flying by. So it's freezing cold outside. My wife and my two kids are in the car, in the truck. So I'm thinking, I got to get my family off the road as quick as possible. So I call up a friend who was at the birthday party, and he picks up my family, and he brings them back home while I wait with the truck, and I'm going to try to work on it. So I pop the hood, and I'm trying to figure out stuff, and I don't know a lot about vehicles. So I'm like, well, that's a hose. That one's not broken. That's a battery, still a square. It's not a lot that I know about vehicles, so I'm trying to figure out, and I noticed in the warning light, every time that I would try to start it, it said battery. The battery light would come on, so I thought maybe the battery died, and we'll try that out. So I got someone to bring me a battery, and it was at least an hour before they were able to deliver the battery to me. So I'm sitting in freezing cold weather in my truck on top of the spillway while vehicles are flying by. So I'm scared for my life just sitting there, but it's starting to get cold in the truck. It's just really eerie, and I'm waiting for them to come, and finally they show up, and by this time it's about 11 o'clock at night. So I hurry up and I swap out the battery, try to put the new connectors on, see if it will work, and it doesn't work. So I can't get the truck to work, and I'm just like, I don't know what to do this late at night. So I'll call another friend of mine who's here today, and I say, man, can we just come tomorrow morning first thing and tow my vehicle? You get it off the road. And he's like, absolutely. So I'm able to get a ride home. And then first thing in the morning, my friend and I go out in his truck, and whenever we show up to where my vehicle was left parked, this is what we see. So my truck is gone. And not only is it gone, but show a little bit closer one, but you can tell something happened here. So I call the state troopers, and I'm on the phone with them for a couple hours before I figure out what happened. And what happened is someone fell asleep at the wheel on the way home and took out my truck, completely totaled my truck, and the guy survived. I want to show you the pictures. Here's my truck where it hits the guardrail. On the backside, it shows where he hit it. So this is where he ends up hitting my truck. My truck was full of tools because I had done some carpenter work that day. Tools all over the road, everywhere. And then show his vehicle. This is this guy's vehicle. When I talked to the state trooper, I was so nervous, and I was like, did I break any laws? Is the guy okay? I'm asking all these questions, and he says, no, you have a grace period to get your vehicle off the road at a certain time. And when we showed up at the scene, the guy was sitting on the guardrail. He was totally okay. And he had just fallen asleep at the wheel. The guy was okay, so just a weight came off of me. And I was like, oh, thank God. Well, after all of this happened, I'm starting to think now, I'm like, okay, now when everything's kind of, calmed down and everybody's okay, I'm like, well, now I don't have a truck. So what happens now that I don't have a truck? Well, his insurance completely ends up paying for my truck. So I get a large enough settlement to be able to purchase a Tundra, which was a hand-me-down. Brookes' dad ended up selling me a truck, which I needed because as your church planting, you need you need to be able to move trailers around. So I get a truck, no money, we'd have to pay anything for it. It was an unbelievable situation. And I thought about it after, and I was like, man, God, where were you in this? Because I know you protected us. I know you kept us safe. But I don't know that you wrecked my truck. But it sure seems like you worked it out perfectly for everyone. This guy was okay. We were okay. We got a new truck out of this, and I didn't understand it. And at the moment, we went through some moments of fear and how in the world, but then it made total sense afterward. And I believe that God really, he was looking out for us, and he stopped those vehicles from hitting us at that time, but he also turned something that looked terrible into an actual blessing. And I look at this guy Mephibosheth's life, and I think, what would have happened to him if he would not have been crippled? Now, I'm not making a statement that God dropped him and that he was supposed to be broken, but God used that to save his life. Can you imagine the descendant of Saul, the next in line to be raised up, and as David, God is appointing David as king? If there's anyone left, one of David's mighty men may have tried to go and take him out. This guy Mephibosheth could have had a very different life. He could have lost his life even early on. But he's running from God at this moment. And God is, I believe, protecting him, saving him. Can you imagine if Mephibosheth would have been okay and one day he rises up to power and he tries to fight against David, who is now God's man? It wouldn't have worked well for him. But God is watching over him. I love this. It says in 2 Corinthians 4, it says this, we now have this light shining in our hearts, but we ourselves are like fragile clay jars containing this great treasure. This makes it clear that our great power comes from God, not from ourselves. And the reason I love this is because it proves to me that the weaker that we are, the more God gets the honor. The more God gets the glory for anything good that comes out of our lives. And when I say weak and when I say broken, I don't mean that you're living a life of sin and you're just doing whatever you want. Not that kind of brokenness that we sometimes name. But I think that whenever we have a past and a history of things that just seem, gosh, how in the world is God going to get us through this? That the more fragile our jar is, the more God can be seen. And I see that in Mephibosheth's life as we jump into the rest of the story. It's just a powerful story, but I think it's important for us to remember we can't harbor bitterness at God because of our brokenness. Instead, we should say, God, how do you want to use this? Can you use this at all? I had a friend of mine when I was young. We used to carpool with some friends to go to school. Our school was about 30 minutes away. And we would carpool, and in the afternoons, this friend of mine would stay at our house for a couple of hours until their parents would get off of work. So we had this huge tugboat rope swing in our backyard coming out of an oak tree, and we would swing on that thing for hours, and it was so cool. And there was one afternoon we were waiting for his parents to come home, and I was swinging him. And at the time, this guy was little, so he was much smaller than me. So I was strong enough to push him pretty high because of his size versus my size. So I'm pushing him high on the swing, and kids never say stop. Kids are like higher, higher. So I'm pushing this guy, and at one point, at the very top of the swing, this one direction, he loses his grip, and he flies off the rope. And when he falls off, he lands on the ground, and it's probably from this floor about this high up. So it's about 10 feet off the ground, and he falls on the ground, and he starts screaming immediately. So I run over there, and I'm like, man, are you okay? And he's like, no, my arm. So as he rolls over and he tries to sit up, his arm just does this. His arm is just hanging. Both bones in his forearm just cracked all the way through. So I'm like, I'm already can't handle this, not very good at this, wasn't never meant to be a nurse. So I'm like, but this guy needs help. What do I do? So I scoop him up, and as I pick him up, I run inside gently because he's just crying. And I'm like, Mom, his arm's not doing what it's supposed to do. Let's get some help, So we ended up calling his mom, and I don't remember if we brought him to the hospital or if his mom ended up bringing us, but it was just, it was just a terrible moment where I felt for him, but he was so helpless in that moment. There was no way he would have gotten himself inside in the car, much less to the hospital. He needed somebody in that moment to lift him up, to give him some help. And I hate whenever I see people, especially those who are Christians, and they are broken, and they are going through something by themselves. If you learn to lean on God, if you learn to call out for help, if you learn to say, I am weak here, then God wants to scoop us up. God wants to take us to safety. God wants to take us to healing. So this guy, Mephibosheth, let's go on in the rest of his story. In 2 Samuel 9, it says that one day, David is king and he's accomplished so much. And he looks back and he remembers his friend Jonathan, and he says this. He says, is there anyone in Saul's family? Saul's family. Now this is Saul, a man who wanted to kill him, a king who hated David. And David wants to honor him anyway because he remembers that God once had a calling on his life. And he says, is there anyone in Saul's family still alive? Anyone to whom I can show kindness for Jonathan's sake, my friend. So he summoned a man named Ziba, who had been one of Saul's servants. Are you Ziba? The king asked. Yes, sir, I am, Ziba replied. So the king asked him, is there anyone still alive from Saul's family? If so, I want to show kindness to them. Ziba replied, yes, one of Jonathan's sons is still alive. He's crippled in both feet. Where is he? The king asked. In Lo-debar. Ziba told him, at the home of Machir, son of Amiel. So David sent for him and brought him from Machir's home. And as I look at this, man, David reaching out for this lame prince, for this guy who once had everything for him, who's now in hiding. And you look at David, this is a picture of God looking for those who are broken, looking for someone to lift up and honor, looking for someone to bring back to what the lineage and the purpose that they had whenever they were created. I believe this, just like this friend Jonathan, and just like Mephibosheth, that unless you allow God to carry you, then people will never see hope for them. Because there's going to be people who don't know Jesus yet, who are looking at your life, and when you go through a season that's difficult, that's tough for you, that seems like a hell that you'll never get out of, when people look at how you respond and how you're willing to say, I need God in this. I need you to be carried by you. And you're humble enough to say, I can't make it on my own, then people can look at your life and say, man, I see hope for me too. Because it's not that you've got to be so strong that you can pull yourself out of the mud. It's just that you've got to be humble enough to submit yourself to someone stronger. You've got to submit yourself to God. People can see hope for them in that. So David looks for Mephibosheth, and this guy Ziba says that he's in a place called Lo-debar. He's in a different town. Do you know what Lo-debar means? Lo-debar means no pasture. No pasture. And in the Bible, every time that a pasture is mentioned, it is a symbol of plenty, of purpose, of promise, of growth, of prosperity. It's a symbol of all good things, of everything that represents life when you hear pasture. This guy Mephibosheth has changed his name. He's running away. He's a son of shame, hiding in a place that has no pasture, hiding in a place of death, of sadness. And all of a sudden, David calls for him. All of a sudden, his name is called and someone begins to look for him. It says this in John 10. Jesus mentions this. Yes, I am the gate, verse 9. Those who come through me will be saved. They will come and go freely and find good pastures. The thief's purpose is to steal, to kill, and to destroy. But my purpose is to give them a rich and satisfying life. You know what I love about this? Jesus says that my purpose is to lead them into pastures, that they can come and go freely from good pastures. He says pastures plural. What I believe he's saying is that in every season you can go from pasture to pasture. That no matter how difficult your season is, you might be coming out of what seems good on the surface and bad to what seems on the surface. But Jesus says in me, it can still be a pasture. In me, you can go from pasture to pasture to pasture. He says the thief wants to steal. The thief wants to kill you in those moments. He wants to destroy you in those moments. But it's my purpose to bring you a pasture in every new season. So this guy Mephibosheth, he's not in a pasture. He's in a place of death. And David begins to call out to him. And one of the things that I've noticed is that in Jesus, just like Mephibosheth is about to experience, even in your brokenness, you can be in a pasture. You can be in a place of life, a place of hope. It says this in verse 6 as we continue in 2 Samuel. It says, his name was Mephibosheth. His name was son of shame. He was Jonathan's son and Saul's grandson. But when he came to David, he bowed low to the ground in deep respect and I'm sure still fear. He's been running all his life. David said, greetings, Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth replied, I am your servant. Don't be afraid, David said. I intend to show kindness to you because of my promise to your father Jonathan. I will give you all the property that once belonged to your grandfather Saul, and you will eat here with me at the king's table. Mephibosheth bowed respectfully and exclaimed, who is your servant that you should show such kindness to a dead dog like me? Have you ever been in a dead dog season? Have you ever been in a season where you just felt kicked around? We've been on mission trips for years, and in El Salvador, that's one of the things that you see is that there's dogs everywhere, and every one of them is full of disease-ridden, and if a dog dies right there in the street, I remember this one picture clearly, kids jumping over a dog for fun that was dead, and there's flies attacking this dog, and this dog's just in the street, sewage running into its back and going around it while kids are playing there. Nobody cared. The dog was worthless. That's the picture I see here. Whenever Mephibosheth says, why would you show a dead dog like me kindness? I'm in the street. Nobody cares about me. Kids run past me and they see me as a freak. Why would you, the king, care about me? Mephibosheth is at a place where all he has is humility. All he has is this feeling of, I've got nothing to offer. I am a dead dog, and David reaches for him, and if it wasn't for David's reach, he would have stayed hidden forever. You know, the good news today is that no matter how broken you feel, no matter where you come from, no matter how much of a dead dog you feel, Jesus is reaching for you today. Jesus is reaching for you, and he wants to pull you up to royalty. He wants to adopt you and to say, I've got a purpose for you. You might feel like a dead dog, but I died for you so that you wouldn't have to do that, so that you could experience real life instead of death. Jesus is reaching for you today, and I love this. It's a beautiful picture. In verse 11b, it says this. In the second part of 11, it says, Mephibosheth ate regularly at the king's table, like one of the king's own sons. This guy, all his life he grows up hiding, running, son of shame, crippled, has nothing to his name. And because of the reach of the king, all of a sudden, in an instant, his life has changed. Because of the reach of Jesus today, your life in an instant can be changed. In an instant, you can become one of the king's own sons. I love the picture of adoption. So when you talk about adoption, kid doesn't do anything. It's all the parent. It's all the parents who love, who decide that they're going to do this. Brooke and I have been on this journey, and we've been able to adopt our little girl who's 8 years old now, and it's been the most beautiful picture for us. We've just been blown away at God's grace, but it was not easy. It was not an easy road for us. We took her in, we started fostering her, and we thought from the very beginning that it would be a pretty easy process. This is what we were told. And a few months into the process, all of a sudden a family member stepped in and wanted to take her, wanted to take her to live with them in Illinois. So our daughter Brooklyn is just heartbroken when we tell her. She understands this. She was at an age, she was 5 at the time whenever this news starts happening, and she understands exactly what's going on. She's going to lose this family that finally, the one family that finally loved her like she deserved to be loved, and it broke her heart. This is Thanksgiving a couple years ago, and I remember that she before we go to court, she is thinking, I'm going home. I'm going to a new place, and I'm going to lose this family that's loved me. And she would cry herself to sleep. She didn't eat for a couple weeks. She lost 10 pounds for a 60-pound kid. That's a lot. She is just devastated. We're devastated. We're trying to comfort each other. We're crying every night. And I remember sitting at her bedside one night, holding her hand while she cried herself to sleep. And I'm trying to be a strong dad for her. And I'm crying like a baby because I know I'm about to lose my little girl. But God does this incredible miracle in the middle of all this. Right before the court date, as we're going in and the social workers tell us there is no scenario which Brooklyn goes home with you after this date. So get her bags ready. Get everything ready. She's going to go home. The family's coming down from Illinois, and all of a sudden we get a call from the social worker who, it just says, or it was a text to Brooke, and the text just said, they changed their mind. And we were like, what? What does this mean? So we call immediately, and she says, yeah, they decided they don't want to take Brooklyn, and they want you guys to keep her. So it's just this incredible miracle right away where we were like, how could this happen? And it's only God. Our church was praying for us. We were being lifted up, and we had so many people supporting us. It was all God. We had weakness. Our life was so broken at this point. We understood what it meant to have a lameness in our life like Mephibosheth. We were weak as could be. And if it wasn't for God stepping in, there would still be that emptiness in us today, but he filled it. He replaced it. He did a miracle in us. And not everything in your life gets restored. I understand that. I know we lose things, and sometimes we never get those things back. But God has this miracle working way about him, that he has a way of filling what seems empty. Because I want you to see this. It says in verse 13 of 2 Samuel 9, it says, and Mephibosheth, who was crippled in both feet, lived in Jerusalem and ate regularly at the king's table. You know what this says to me? Mephibosheth never was healed. He stayed lame all his life. He was broken for the rest of his life. But the invitation to the king's table made up for that. The invitation to relationship with the king, the invitation to be a part of the king's table regularly, to have his land restored, to have his value restored, it made up for what stayed broken in him. And there might be something in your life that you feel like, man, if I only had that back, if I only had that relationship back, if I only had this moment in my life that I lost because of my stupidity or something was stolen from me, then I would be filled. Then I'd be complete. That's not the case. It doesn't matter if you get back anything that was yours in this life. The only thing that matters is, does Jesus invite you to the table, and have you accepted it? Have you accepted the invitation to the king's table? And he accepts us today. There's hope for the broken soul today. And no matter where you feel you are, no matter how broken and impossible your situation might seem, Jesus invites us to his table today.